As far as regular season losses go, they don't get more frustrating than a 3-2 shootout loss where you were winning 2-0 early. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, we're going to dissect the Oilers' 3-2 shootout loss to the Red Wings. We're going to start with the flow of the game and why it felt very weird. They talked about it quite a bit on the broadcast as well as Detroit started to mount its comeback. In the second segment, it's going to be a lot of conversation about attention to details and focus. And then we'll tie a bow on this game, just trying to contextualize it as a singular game. But when you lose a game where you get out to a 2-0 lead and early, and the two goals you score are funky, where you feel like, oh, it's going to be easy to keep scoring in this game, it's about as frustrating as it's going to get. And I should preface this opening segment with the caveat that this is one game. The Oilers have been playing really good hockey since American Thanksgiving, and it's about to be February tomorrow. So you're allowed lapses, you're allowed mess ups, bad games. That's all part of the process. In a long season, you're going to have highs and you're going to have lows. And this is certainly amongst you can't call it a low point, but this is a low. This is a bad loss. You shouldn't be losing to Detroit outright. You shouldn't be blowing multi-goal leads to Detroit because everything about this game was going your way through the first 20 minutes. That opening goal Draisaitl scores, the puck lands on his stick with basically a wide open net in front of him as that puck caroms out after a scrum near the net mouth, and it's 1-0. Okay. You're feeling pretty good. You got on the board first, which has been an issue for the Oilers over the last 2 weeks or so, where the other team has scored first. And in quite a few of those cases, the other team has scored 2 goals before the Oilers have scored 1. So you felt good there. And then you get a second goal from Jeff Skinner, someone who A, hasn't had a lot of offensive success this year, and B, on a similar fortuitous bounce where it's a little bit ugly. Detroit fails to clear the zone. Alex Lyon goes down a little bit earlier than he probably should have, and Skinner gets a tap in, and you're sitting there at 2-0 very early on in this game against a bad defensive team with an unproven goalie is how I would characterize Lyon. You should feel pretty good about that. And the Oilers had opportunities to make this game 3-0. Frankly, you can make an argument the Oilers probably should have scored 4 or 5 goals in this game, but they just could not get the bounces to go their way. And that's where we can start to talk about this from the Detroit perspective. And to their credit, at 2-0 on the road against a team that's first in the Pacific, it would have been very easy for the Red Wings to kind of give up on this game, to start to phone it in, to not have the attention detail needed to get back in this game. And the Red Wings, to their credit, found a way to make the Oilers uncomfortable. And they talked about it on the broadcast a little bit as Detroit started to mount their comeback, that Detroit was kind of lulling the Oilers to sleep. The Oilers kept gaining the offensive zone with speed through the neutral zone. They would get it into Detroit zone. They would shoot the puck one time, and that would be it. Detroit would recover, and Detroit would go the other way. That was really the extent of the offense for the Oilers for a good stretch of that middle period. And that's what we talk about a lot here on Locked On Oilers, the idea that while rush-based offense in transition often leads to dangerous scoring chances, you're typically only going to get one look off of that because you're typically not going to be able to regain possession after creating off the rush. And Detroit, both of their goals in regulation come off of the rush. You know, you get a clean zone entry, Rasmussen drives the net, and Bergen shoots from a kind of mediocre angle, but you have traffic in front and you have a redirection that gets Detroit on the board. And then the second Detroit goal, I mean, that's just a mismatch. You know, I think Ty Emerson is having a really solid first season in Edmonton so far, but he's a kid. He doesn't have a ton of NHL experience. And Dylan Larkin is a very gifted hockey player, especially when it comes to using his speed. He's been one of the fastest players in the league since getting to the NHL more than a decade ago at this point now. And when you have those types of mismatches and you get that opportunity, Oiler fans know this. When you get a speedy guy on a not speedy defenseman, it's pretty easy to inflect the game. And then at 2-2, you saw the Oilers start to tense up a little bit. You saw the Oilers start to clunk it up a little bit. And look, the Oilers had a majority of the possession in this game. They had more than enough scoring chances to score a goal at some point in regulation to win this game. They had multiple posts. The clearance Seider had late in the third period where Lyon made the initial save. The puck was up in the air over his back, and Seider baseball knocked the puck away out of the corner. That puck very well might have gone in as well. And those stick in my mind. I'll give credit, and we'll talk more about Stuart Skinner in the second segment. I thought Stu had a pretty good game tonight. And look, the 2 goals he gives up, I can't really fault him on the Rasmussen one. It's a redirect on a shot in front with traffic. If you want to say you need him to steal one and he needs to have the Larkin one because he needs to pick up Emerson, fine. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that if Skinner holds the other team to 2, especially a team that's not good defensively like Detroit, you should be able to score 3 if you're Edmonton. That's not a crazy ask. And there will be people who argue, well, the goalie needs to pick them up sometimes, and it's not always going to be about the offense. And I think that's fair. You can argue that some nights the guys who aren't expected to carry the load do need to do it on occasion, but I'm not going to be mad if they don't. This team is not predicated on Stuart Skinner or Adam Henrique or even Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. This is about Connor, Leon, Bush. You want to throw Hyman in there, you want to throw Nurse in there, sure. But for the most part, if you get anything on top of those 5 big names performances, and if you get anything on top of those 5 big names and you win the game, that's gravy. And tonight would have been the night the Oilers needed that. And look, you could see it as that game was going on that the Oilers were definitely a little bit tense, that they let Detroit get back in this game. You look at the Oilers down the stretch, the last 5 minutes or so, how they were kind of chasing it. You look at the penalty they take in overtime because Zach Hyman was setting a pick and they have to kill off a penalty, and how long that takes. You think about McDavid flubbing the puck on the breakaway on the 2-on-1 in overtime as time was about to expire with about 10 seconds to go. Yes, Connor McDavid is fallible. He is human. He was definitely thinking a little faster than his body, which is crazy to think about, that someone as physically gifted as Connor McDavid can even overthink things sometimes. That's quite the paradox to think about, all things considered, when you think about how effortless and seamless he makes it look. Whereas if the hockey stick is just part of his body, that he's able to make those decisions so fast that you would think it was human nature that he was able to do that. But it's one game. It's not great, but it's only one game. We're going to take our first break of today's show. We'll talk a little bit more about how this game came apart for the Oilers and a whole lot more, so be sure to stick around. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. It's been a while for me. My NFL team, the Giants, has been pretty bad most of my adult life. The last time I went to a Giant playoff game, I was in middle school. I turned 28 next week. So it's been a while for me, but I'll never forget the environment, the energy. There's nothing like a rabid football crowd before a big game. And with our friends over at Game Time, who have a new feature called Game Time Picks, they've made it even easier to get tickets for events. It filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you want to get down to New Orleans for the Super Bowl, you want to root for the Birds, or you want to see the Chiefs go for the three-peat, head on over to Game Time. Use Game Time picks, browse through a few of the deals, find great value for your price point for all kinds of seats. The Super Deal is particularly impressive and offers the best value for the event. The app's features like the seat view before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee give users peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who's hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down the Oilers' 3-2 shootout loss to the Red Wings. And it's really an interesting conundrum because the Oilers lost this game because they got to their game how they want to play a little bit too fast. And it's weird because the Oilers' preferred style is volatile. It increases the variance within a game because of the tempo. When you play at a higher tempo, there are more overall scoring chances for both teams. You know, the idea of up and down trading chances. And I can't tell guys who are good at hockey to not do what they're good at. You know, it would feel oxymoronic for me to tell the Oilers' best players, hey, instead of driving the net when you gain the zone with speed and have a matchup advantage, take the puck to the wall, cycle, go high to low, look for point shots, try and milk clock, try and put heat on the other team. Because when you're protecting a lead, your priorities need to change a little bit. And I'm not saying don't try and score. I'm not saying turtle and play overly defensive. I'm saying you need to make more calculated decisions, and settling for that one and done chance off of the rush. It might seem like a good idea. You know, you're listening to the devil and the angel on your shoulder. At a certain point during that stretch where Detroit started to get their feet under them and get back in this game, and look, both Detroit goals happened pretty quickly. They happened within 2 minutes of each other. So it's not entirely fair of me to say, hey, guys, you needed to do a better job slowing the game down, because we're only talking about 3 or 4 shifts going from 2-0 to 2-2. But that's something a team can do to kind of take the air out of a comeback. Is even if you don't go down and score, you get that puck in deep on Detroit. You get that puck below the goal line. You forecheck, you force them to play defense. That's important. That takes the air out of their sails. Every single time you make the opponent go the length of the ice with a loose puck to get to offense, that's 200 some odd feet they got to cover, and that's 40 seconds off the clock. And it's not exciting. It's not fun to play dump and chase hockey. You have heard me bemoan dump and chase hockey at points as being a means of slowing the game down, of trying to put the onus on the other team to make mistakes and play off of those mistakes. But that's how you really can take advantage when the game starts to snowball. Because as much as the Oilers thrive in transition, and you hear me talk about it on the show all the time about how they like to pounce on mistakes, on a night like tonight, where the puck was very skippy on the ice, it really wouldn't settle. It was on edge a lot. It took some funky bounces on the way in. This was the type of game where slowing it down a little bit probably would have behooved the Oilers in the bigger picture of this game, because at 2-0, to let Detroit score 2 straight is not inconceivable. It's not like an embarrassment or an abomination. But the way they concede the Oilers concede those 2 goals, that doesn't feel great to you. It doesn't. And it's one game. Detroit has individual talent that's impressive. Like Dylan Larkin is a really good hockey player. You know, we can have an entirely different conversation as to whether or not Larkin is a first line center on a Stanley Cup caliber team. But he, as an individual talent, he's got the speed, he's got the size, he's got decent hands. There's a very talented hockey player there. And Emerson, who I think is having a good first season with the team, that's a mismatch. It's going to happen. You're not going to be able to isolate and protect guys no matter what you do for an entire game for a whole season. There are going to be moments where he's going to be out there against the other team's best players, and you're going to need to make him to make a play, or you're going to need him to learn from that mistake. And it's frustrating. That's the word I would use. It's disappointing. It's frustrating. You feel for the people who paid to be there tonight to watch the Oilers get out to the lead. You start puffing your chest out, thinking, "Oh, we're going to run up the score tonight. We're going to look for a touchdown. We're going to put six past the line, and we're going to go into Saturday night. We're going to go into Hockey Night in Canada, coming off a huge win. We're going to play the Leafs, and we're going to beat them too. We're going to be on a nice little run here." And you let Detroit hang around. And look, I think Detroit is a very, very poorly constructed roster that is focusing on all of the wrong things. But they have enough talent where they can make you uncomfortable. Alex DeBrincat has scored 40 goals in the NHL before. He is a very good hockey player. And the Oilers, they didn't have the attention to detail tonight because that's what transition hockey is, especially defensively. Because when you're in the neutral zone or you're in your own zone and you need to play defense in transition, it becomes a matter of passing guys off and following your rules. Do you pick up who you're supposed to? Are you where you need to be based on where the puck is? It's a real prove it point because transition is probably the state of the game with the most variables to account for because of the speed involved that increases the volatility of the environment, if you will. Because if you're skating very quickly at a specific point on the ice, the opportunity for that puck to move again, it exponentially increases the danger. It's why transition play is so valuable, because you have the added factor of movement, where if you can get the defenders moving or the goalie moving. And that first Detroit goal, I won't say it's the greasiest you're ever going to see, but that's what you need to do when you're trying to claw your way back in a game, especially against a team that's better than you. And I thought Detroit at various points did a decent job of making the Oilers play defense. And the underlying numbers, they tell you the story. The Oilers had the puck more in this game. They created more dangerous chances. They just didn't convert enough of them. And again, I think you can tie that to an attention to detail. And then what at first it's attention to detail where it's 2-1, 2-2. Then at 2-2, it's a little bit of angst of we blew that lead, and you start to overthink it, you start to sweat it. And as we always talk about, you got to have the short memory. You got to forget what just happened. You got to go back out there like nothing happened, and you got to make your plays. And the Oilers tonight just didn't make enough of them. And in a long season, that's going to happen. You're going to have your stinkers. You're going to have your bad games. And it's important the Oilers have these bad games now. And look, in an ideal world, yeah, you want to get all your stinkers out of the way by March. That way, by the time the playoffs come, the possibility of a stinker isn't even on your radar. But that's not how sports work. You don't get to pick and choose when you turn it on and off. As much as some teams are guilty or culpable of that at points in a long season, that's a terrible habit to get into. And the Oilers have some things to work on. I think they need to get off to faster starts. I know today was an exception. They scored the first two, but I think consistently getting off to better starts. I think being more complacent with settling for zone time as opposed to just trying to get that quick look would help them mitigate a lot of what's hurt them defensively this year, which is transition. Bush is not the biggest or strongest guy, doesn't have a huge reach. Darnell Nurse is very volatile and choosing when he chooses to pinch and go. I thought Klingberg looked a little skittish tonight. We'll talk a little bit more about him in the final segment. And I do want to be fair. First game guys played since October of last year. So we can show some grace and some compassion for a guy who's going to need a little bit of time to figure it out. But I thought the Oilers did a reasonable enough job in this game, but with the attention to detail not being there, it just leaves a weird taste in your mouth. We're going to take one more break on today's show. We come back, we'll tie a bow on the game. We'll talk about Klingberg's debut as an Oiler. We'll talk a little bit more about the style of the game and why that worked against the Oilers coming up next, so be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we tie a bow on a disappointing loss. But again, not the end of the world. You got to put context around these games, and you got to understand that just one of these bounces changes the entire complexion of the game. The Oilers had more than one opportunity to make this a 3-0 game, and then at that point, Detroit probably isn't able to get back in the game. So take some solace in that, take some deep breaths, and remember, in a long season, there are highs, there are lows, and you get to go back out there and reset. By the time you're watching this, the Oilers or listening, the Oilers will be less than a day away from playing the Leafs hockey night in Canada. The Leafs, who are having, I won't say issues, but they're definitely in the midst of a feeling out process as far as what they need at the deadline. They had a weird game the other night where they had just a really hard time. And if you're the Oilers, the Klingberg experiment tonight was interesting. And I thought it was really, I won't say unique, but I think it showed a lot of faith that the Oilers were willing to play him with Matthias Ekholm right out of the gate and give him a decent chunk. And look, he didn't play a ton of minutes, especially at 5-on-5, only 16 minutes. It's third most of the Oilers defensemen at 5-on-5. Nurse first, Ekholm second, Klingberg third. Klingberg played more than Bush at 5-on-5 in all situations. Bouchard was first, Nurse, Ekholm, Kulak, then Klingberg. So when you account for penalty kill and power play time, it evens out. You probably are going to see some growing pains. I thought the Oilers, especially early on, those first few Klingberg shifts, he definitely looked like he was feeling out where he needed to be. I thought him and Ekholm definitely have to work on their communication as far as coming and going, as to who's taking the man, who's dropping, because the pass-offs weren't clean and let the Red Wings get in tight, and those shots didn't ultimately end up going in, but that's something you're going to need to work out. And I am willing to be patient with Klingberg, who hasn't played hockey in almost a year at this point, dating back to October of 2023 with the Maple Leafs. So I'm willing to give him some time. I think for a first game back, for someone who hasn't played hockey in a long time, not a terrible game. I think as we go along, as he gets more reps, I think we'll get a more accurate understanding of where he's at, what he has left in the tank. And I do think that's a fair conversation to be had. What situations the Oilers expect him to play in, what situations they don't. If he's going to play with Ekholm at 5-on-5 and Bouchard's going to play with Nurse, and you're going to play Kulak with Emerson, I think that's okay as far as your 5-on-5 allocation. Now, I do have some questions as far as how that's all going to shake out down the line. Do the Oilers still feel like they need to go out there and add another defenseman? Or do they feel okay with Troy Stecher as the 7th D and Emerson as the 6th D? Or do you want to try and get a real top 4 guy and push everyone down one more spot so you could do something like Ekholm or Bouchard with the new guy? You could do Klingberg. Look, Klingberg with Nurse definitely gives me a little bit of pause because both of those guys seem a bit volatile as far as their traits and what they do. But I think I'm very curious because I just frankly don't know. This is not a surgery a lot of NHL players have had. Patrick Kane came back. He was pretty good last year. This year, he hasn't been the same. Nick Backstrom has not come back from that injury the same, and it's been very, very arduous to see. You would have thought Backstrom almost certainly was going to end up being a Hall of Famer, the pace he was on for the counting stats based on where he was at after 2020. But double hip resurfacing is major, major surgery, and dealing with that lingering discomfort, it's complicated. And I'm very grateful that science has advanced to the point where guys are able to overcome pain. John Klingberg, they mentioned this on the broadcast tonight. John Klingberg had hip surgery when he was a kid, and he had been in chronic pain in his hips for most of his adult life, and said this is the first time in his life he doesn't feel pain. So taking the hockey out of it, it's good to see that guys are getting treatment, are feeling better, because ultimately we are just talking about hockey here. And I know that's going to sound a little bit participation trophy coming from me, who's very much a what do you do, where are the results, show me the data. But I do care. I do want these guys to be able to play and then have lives after hockey. It is important that we have a healthy game, that guys are able to pass on their institutional knowledge. A lot of these guys, when they hang it up, they're going to go back to their hometown or wherever they end up. They're going to end up coaching youth hockey. They're going to end up coaching their kids. I saw video the other day of Joe Pavelski back in Wisconsin coaching his kids. And look, Joe is a fringe hockey Hall of Famer, one of the best ever, one of the best of his era. And that's the type of guy that goes back home and keeps the game alive. And it's important that we move that next group of guys along to get there. And look, I'm not saying John Klingberg's going back to Sweden to coach hockey, but I do think that having a better quality of life is something we can all unanimously agree upon as being a good thing. So I'm very excited to see what he has left. It was not the smoothest first game back. Like I said, the transition stuff was a bit concerning, but his numbers weren't terrible tonight. 15, 18 chances for and against, 8 to 9 shots for and against. They were on the ice for 1 goal against, no goals for. They were out expected goals. It wasn't atrocious from them by any means. Well, I'm very curious to see how it goes along as we get closer to the deadline, but I'm happy he's getting a chance. It's a worthwhile gamble if you're the Oilers, because worst case, it's just money and you can move money around going forward. All right, that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Before we get out of here, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please throw the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. I will talk to you guys on Monday, hopefully about a win against the Maple Leafs. I'll talk to you guys then. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Let's go Oilers.